Hi, I'm Jennifer and welcome to 1,000 Women, 1,000 Ways. Today's inspiring story is by Indigo, and Indigo's story starts when she was 3 years old. Welcome to the show, Indigo.
Thank you.
How are you feeling?
A little bit nervous.
That's okay. All as it's meant to be. Now, what happened at 3 years old for you?
I started dancing and continued that for about 20 years. I loved it a lot actually, but it was also a tough time with grumpy dance teachers and jealous girls, and there was a lot of bullying and nastiness as well.
So what was happening to you at 3 years old? This is something that you really remember.
I remember probably not at 3, but a few years later going to class and bursting into tears in the car and saying I don't want to go because I was really scared of the teacher.
So how was the teacher treating you?
Well, though it was her and her mother, and the mother in particular was very grumpy and would growl and yell and snap at us students. And this is meant to be a fun, joyful experience. But also I was really good at dancing, and so I started to feel some pressure to be good. And also the type of dancing that I was doing, there were exams, and doing exams just started to really put that pressure on about being perfect.
So it wasn't a sort of nurturing environment from the sounds of it?
No, not really. It was highly performance-based. And even though I really enjoyed it and I loved it, absolutely loved it, it came probably with an equal dose of perfectionism and concern about approval from others, which wasn't really helpful as a developing child.
No, definitely not. And how did it affect you?
It made me really self-conscious about my physical appearance, about my abilities, about my intelligence, about my likability, and competitive as well.
So it was starting to show you sides of life that you hadn't experienced before and having to deal with.
Yes, and without the right support there to guide me through those decisions at such a young age, those thoughts and those experiences. Because quite often things would happen and I wouldn't share about it because I wouldn't think to. It happened to me, and so I would just internalise it. And so I'd be struggling with what was going on to me and around me without the knowledge that I could actually talk to someone about it or that there was anything wrong with it. And so I'd just be coping on my own. And that would lead me to being quite upset, quite moody. If something else went wrong, then I might snap and people wouldn't understand why I was crying over spilt milk or something like that. But there was actually this whole underworld of stress and anxiety and self-doubt festering underneath.
And that was the dancing aspect of it. What was going on at school?
I had a so-called best friend and I really, really wanted us to have a wonderful friendship. She lived around the corner from me, and probably, I don't exactly remember day one that it started, but from kindergarten she started bullying me, and in the way only little girls can do, through looks, comments, exclusion, really nasty, hurtful things that children can do to each other. And again, I internalised it. This followed me right through into primary school and also into high school, and eventually I left school because of the bullying.
And it was it the bullying from your so-called best friend that followed you all the way through high school?
Yeah.
And did you make other friends, or was it always this sort of a dynamic?
I did make other friends, but by that stage my self-confidence was really pretty shattered. The one thing that I felt good about was my dancing, and because I'd continued through these years and I was achieving a lot with that. And then that was being used against me also by this friend.
So do you think it was a jealousy on her part with the dancing?
Most definitely. And I think she, upon reflection, I think she was quite jealous of a lot of the things that I had, as far as my parents were still together, her parents weren't. So I had a really secure home. I think she was struggling with a lot with the breakup of her family. She also had an older brother and an older sister, whereas I was the youngest. So we were a younger family, and I wasn't exposed to the teenage things that she was exposed to so early. So we really came from quite different worlds, and my mum was really caring and loving, and my dad towards her. She was always included in birthday parties and everything, and she'd come round in the mornings before school, and my mum would, tidy up her hair or tie up her shoelaces or whatever it was that she needed at the time. So she was always really, really welcome in our home, and I was so thrilled to have this friend that wanted to be there and be with me. And that's why it would hurt so much when she would turn on me. Usually she would do that with other girls, and so I'd be excluded from the group.
So how did you feel when you've got someone that you obviously love and care about and is coming to your house and welcomed? What's going on for little Indigo at that time?
It was devastating, heartbreaking. It eventually led me to feel a lot of stress. I presented at the doctors at the age of about 15 with what I described a concrete weight on my chest, which was diagnosed as stress, and I now know that it was the beginnings of depression and that sense of being powerless, really powerless. And at the same time, I was diagnosed with an eating disorder.
So you had a lot going on. So you had the bullying at school and you had the dancing school as well, and nobody to talk to because your best friend, who normally you can talk to, maybe you didn't because it would be used against you.
Absolutely. And I did talk to my parents about it, and they helped the best that they could. Things were really different back then. There wasn't the knowledge and the support network out there. We didn't have the internet for starters. So there just wasn't the knowledge or the support to help parents understand what's going on with their children and what sort of psychological and social support that we needed. We were very much on our own.
Yeah, so at 15 you were diagnosed with an eating disorder, which was anorexia.
Anorexia.
Yeah. And so what happened from there with these two pressures going on, the best friend and dancing, and then you're diagnosed with an eating disorder? What happened then?
Well, I had to take a lot of time off school. I was put to bed rest and strict instructions to increase my food intake. If I didn't, probably I had about 4 to 6 weeks up my sleeve, and then I would have been hospitalised. So it worked for me. We didn't have any other support. There was no counselling, there was no material provided. It was just go home and cope for yourself. And during that time, I lost another friend that was supposedly my best friend then. She decided that she thought I was putting it on, and I had a boyfriend and I lost him as well. So essentially I lost all the support network that I could have had to get through this tough time. I was on my own. So I left school.
Did you feel like, was your mum able to understand what was going on?
They did understand, yeah, they did. But they were frustrated at what to do. They were trying to help me. And as a mum now, I can see in what my own children have experienced that they could see the bigger picture, that this really wasn't the be-all and end-all of life, that this one girl wasn't everything, and that it would be possible to just not worry about her anymore. But at the time, she was everything. And then even when I was no longer wanting to be best friends with her once I hit high school and was making other friends, she was just so awful to me. I spent so much time in the year master's office, and he in fact really validated my experience one time when we went to a school reunion. We spoke, I won't use the words that he used to describe the situation, but it was very powerful and really healing for me to hear what he had to say so many years, 25 years or something a lot later, about what I had experienced, what he had witnessed and what he had tried to support me through, which he did. He did a really good job. He was brilliant.
So there was someone there that could help support you at that time.
Yeah.
So how were you feeling at 15 years old? All these things are going on. How are you feeling inside? Where are you at?
I was completely lost and broken. I was devastated to be treated so badly. I knew that I was a really good and kind person, and to be treated with such cruelty, it didn't make sense. I didn't deserve it, and I would never treat anybody like that.
You see, it's very, very painful for you. Did you ever think of suicide during that time? Because you were going into a depression as well at 15.
To be honest, I don't recall whether I became suicidal then, but what I did do was I starved myself. I also became bulimic.
So it started to move into, or progress into something else.
Yeah. So the eating disorder wasn't treated. Being told to go home and eat isn't really, as we know now, the right advice.
No, thank goodness. Like I said, there is a lot of help and support around that today. Yes. Yeah. So from your experience and viewers watching today, what would you say to them, a 15-year-old girl, or even, there's 8, 9-year-old girls with anorexia, or what would you say to them?
Well, what I've come to learn about eating disorders, because I now work in that field, there are different reasons why people start having an eating disorder. And for me, self-esteem was a really big issue, and I think that is one of the biggest keys for probably most people. The very thing that I've been trying to instill in my own daughters is to understand that everybody has a perception and has their own reality about you and about the world, and to not take on someone else's perception or someone else's reality that they are trying to put onto you. If you can protect yourself with your own sense of self, your own, what you really know is true about you. So for me, I knew I was a good person, I knew I was kind, and that has been my core sort of rod that I've been able to hold on to in the tough times, in that stormy water, that's been able to stop me from killing myself. So if a young girl is in a situation, or boy, where it seems as though the whole world is against them and there's no way through, you yourself are your way through. It's what you choose to believe and what you choose to take in from others. And that's probably the hardest thing, I think, possibly for us to learn in the world.
To be your own best friend.
To be your own best friend. And I certainly understand in these later days, having gone through an abusive marriage, with the internet, how easily bullies, abusers can get to you within your own space. And finding a way to protect that safe space is vital as well.
And it's also trusting what you think and not
Absolutely.
having that same perception brought about by others or societal imprinting.
Yeah. We need to be so very convinced in at least one positive aspect of ourselves. Just that one can be enough, and then we can build from that.
So that's the first step, just find one thing.
One thing that you know, that positive strength that you know about yourself, and there will be more.
The next step appears. So where is Indigo now in those teenage years as the bulimia has now developed?
Guilt for eating. So that's the disorder taking place, the changing my thinking, and body shame, and also some body dysmorphia, not realising what I really do look like, And then there's also a big part of using it for attention, because part of the issue has been not feeling loved, not feeling lovable, and certainly not feeling safe. And by having people's attention, it helps to pacify that. So that's one of the darker sides of eating disorders that don't necessarily get talked about, is how we can use them to our advantage.
So it's almost like it's feeding a need for attention, or see me, I am here, and validate me.
Yeah, and even though that's cunning or manipulative, perhaps, it does come from a place of woundedness. So even though you might say to someone, well, you're just seeking attention, the reason they're seeking attention is because they're wounded underneath. So it is really important to be understanding of that, and not wound the person anymore because of it.
So have compassion and understanding for the person.
Yeah.
And how does it play out, like from anorexia to bulimia, with people that haven't experienced that may be watching this?
So for me, my experience was wanting to be thinner, wanting to be the thinnest. That was all I felt that I had at school. I was powerless around these girls, and body image, even back when I was a kid, was important. Being thin, being pretty, being sexy. Once you get into high school, boys are starting to notice you and your bodies are changing, and they comment on the size of your bust and your hips and your bottom, and girls do too, to each other. And of course it's a really hard time. Everyone's got skin breaking out and greasy hair and emotions and moods and so on. What an eating disorder does, it gives you a sense of power and control over your own self, because a lot of stuff's happening that you don't have control over. Hormones, other people.
So it gives you a sense of control.
It does.
And anorexia is almost like a slow suicide. It can be a very, very slow suicide because it's a starvation. Is it also a starvation of emotions? You're starving the emotions rather than feeding the emotions?
Yes, it's a way of coping with the negative feelings and the emotions that arise from that. It keeps it at bay, which is why most people with anorexia are highly strung, because it's like walking on a hot tin roof. I am just keeping everything under control, and I am actually starving, and you know what it's like when you're hungry.
Yes, you get the shakes.
So you're also really hungry, and so you have to disconnect from that feeling of hunger as well. When the body signs come for the grumbly tummy, you've got to change your way that you think about that, or I did. It's like a job. It's a major commitment. And then it takes over and it really changes your brain. And that's when it's hard to recover from that.
Is that where the power is, that suppression of, I'm not hungry, somehow you're telling yourself, and is that I would assume that's the crux of it, because you can start to eat or not and continue not eating, because hunger, it lets you know.
Absolutely. The flip side of that is binge eating, where there's no control. Guess what? Didn't have my anorexia bulimia addressed properly. Later in life, flipped to binge eating, because it's the same thing at the other end of the spectrum. And once I was in an abusive marriage and feeling powerless, I turned to food. And also the history of feeling that I was just a body, praised for my dancing and my physical beauty and all those things that other people saw and talked and responded to. That's all I thought I was.
How much of an effect do you think the societal perception of what a woman should or shouldn't be affected you? Because you had the bullying going on for your best friend, and then you also had what was going on at dancing.
Yes.
So they were a big cause. How did the societal images play in?
Fortunately, I didn't get into girls' magazines. I think I probably would have been a lot worse in my mental thinking had I been reading girl magazines. So I left school and I went to business secretarial college for a year, and then I worked from there in TV, and eventually I went into film. And so it was back in the 80s, and so everyone honoured the sexy woman. So working in commercial production, it put me in a situation where there were a lot of male clients coming through and commenting on my physical appearance and wanting me to model for them. And eventually I did.
So you took up modelling?
I took up modelling.
Did that help your self-esteem because you had been asked to model?
It did, but in a really negative way. Again, it's an external validation. It wasn't coming from within myself. And even though I may have thought that I was enough and good enough, it was only because I was getting the external validation. So when the external stuff went away, it challenged my internal belief.
And compounded what had already been going on?
Yeah.
And then what happened when you met your husband?
There was a lot of external validation, and as I said, when that went away, the marriage became abusive, and I began challenging the truth of the connection and the truth of the love of why he wanted to marry me. What I suspected was actually true, and that it was mostly external. So this put me into, and the next part of what I really do call a journey, as cliche as that is, of understanding that I had gotten myself into this situation based on my own personal values. I'd come to a point where I wasn't okay to live like that anymore. And so I questioned it in the marriage, and when I heard the truth, I didn't want that anymore.
How long did it take you, being married or in a relationship, till you realised that it was external? It was for your looks that he had wanted to marry you?
The timeline is a bit hard to remember because a lot happened over a long time. But I'm going to say, let's say 10 years. There was a lot of stuff said a lot earlier. So it led me to this point where, and what I was getting at before about the eating disorder, where I unconsciously decided to stop living into this role of being the thin trophy wife kind of image. And so I went into binge. And it was kind of like my
defiance towards
him. But not towards him, but towards everyone.
Yes.
Towards the media, towards the world that puts women into that position, which I willingly took up. Yeah. So, I own it. But that's what I was told was my value.
And had you had your children by that stage?
Yes, I had.
Yeah. So you maintained your thinness,
my figure,
throughout that. Yeah.
Yes, up and down. Then I reached this point where I was just so unhappy, and the depression really kicked in, and I felt powerless. As I said, there was abuse, and I turned to food as my coping mechanism. But in the mix was also the resentment and the resistance to having to be and look a certain way. So they buddied up really nicely.
Sounds like it. Sounds incredibly painful, and thank you for being so honest as well.
You're welcome. It's healing for me to share this, and I hope that it resonates for others.
I'm sure it does, because there's so many aspects to your story here. And would you like to talk about the abuse that you were going through in your marriage?
What I would like to say about it is what I said in the very beginning about what I'm trying to teach my daughters, and that is that someone else's reality, someone else's perspective of who you are is theirs, and to find a way to protect yourself from that, whether you need to put space between you, whether it's just done with your own set of beliefs, particularly if you're in a situation you can't get out of, say like at work, you're in a team and there's someone that's really not behaving correctly, and you need to be able to protect yourself emotionally, psychologically from what's going on around you. But as far as in a relationship, if that person doesn't treat you with respect, give yourself that respect to draw a line in the sand and just say no more. And I know that's really easy to say, and I stayed because of the reasons that I had to stay.
And how long did you stay for?
Eventually we were together, officially married for 18 years, but we were together for about 15. There are always really good reasons to stay, and sometimes staying is better to a point. Okay, so for me to be really truthful about that, I think I can share this part. If I had left, my circumstances, I would have had to have gone into a shelter or something like that. And I had a very ill child. And although I know that the psychological effects of staying were horrendous, at the time that felt better than taking my very sick child and her little sister to the street.
You had a roof over your head and you had support and
yes,
the resources to help your sick daughter.
It's a really fine line. I wasn't being hit. Some physical stuff came later, post-separation.
It's an emotional
It's
decision.
not black and white decision. And so I understand why people leave and I understand why people stay. I think the best guidance that I can offer around that is to find the best solution as quickly as possible. Get out as soon as you possibly can into a better situation.
When is the turning point? When is enough? Like for you, when was the day enough was enough?
First of all was the separation, and then it was the real end, beginning of the finalising the end. And there was a lot of fighting, and I could see how much it was affecting my children. And I think I reached a point where I was prepared to do whatever I had to do. I wasn't prepared to sacrifice our mental health any longer.
And you were in a strong position with your daughter, was she? So you were able to leave without threatening her illness?
Well, I think the situation was contributing to it. Of course it was, emotionally. I think more than anything, I reached a point where I couldn't not separate, because it really wasn't a plan. That day, I didn't wake up planning to say, we need to separate. It was spontaneous.
It was like that flick switch.
It just happened.
Yeah. How did you feel once you'd said it, or did you say it that day?
I did. Well, it happened in a moment, as I said. I'm not sure what time of the day it was. It just happened,
yeah.
And that was the next stage of our relationship was being separated. And our situation was a little different. He began working away and then returning to the house when he was back, and then that was causing upset, and so I said the next level was, when you come back you're going to have to stay elsewhere. And so then that changed, and then there was still coming and going from the house because all of his belongings were in the house and using the washing machine and that sort of thing. And that's when I said, finally, after however long that was, it's funny how I don't remember the timeline very accurately, it's a bit of a blur, but it would have been a year or two. What are we doing? What's next? And he decided he didn't want to be together.
So he then moved out completely?
Yeah.
In terms of drawing a line or a boundary, this is how I want to be treated from now on, that can be very hard to do, especially as a woman, because of all the messages that are sent to us as a mother, as a wife, and given what you experienced growing up as well. How could you know what that boundary looked like or respect looked like if you hadn't received that?
Yeah, that's right. And, I had old school parents. Father was the more dominant and mum didn't work, and very traditional family. So I had a very old-fashioned blueprint, I suppose, that I was working from. The inability to work for me with caring for my daughter, that made a big difference. It did leave me quite powerless. I didn't have my own income. I had worked for myself and I had done very well, but it was only part-time work, essentially, parenting and working part-time for myself, and then eventually working part-time in retail. I wasn't really in a very strong position to look after two small girls, one of whom was ill, on my own, possibly out on the street.
So you were sort of captured by your circumstances.
Yeah.
And what did you do once the marriage was over and it was completely, well, you were both completely separated? What state are you in? Where are you at?
It's been a really long, painful separation and divorce process. I'm kind of bewildered about what to say about that, because I ended up becoming very ill with depression and suicide ideation. My daughter became very, very ill and needed serious surgery. And then there's her little sister who is experiencing all this happening around her. It has been the toughest, most harrowing thing I've ever experienced. And during this time I've battled with eating disorder as well. But I kept believing that I would get through it. And in those really tough times when I was really questioning whether the world would be better off if I wasn't here, because of my own mental health training, I could recognise, well, of course that's a really clear indicator, but I could also recognise other indicators much earlier. And so I would get the support, phone a friend, get a counselling appointment, or go and see someone, or call my family. My family has been amazing. I've been very, very fortunate to have mum and dad who have been there for me in many, many ways. But essentially we have to do this on our own.
So what got you through all those years of being in the relationship, knowing you had to stay because of circumstances? What part of you, like looking back and reflecting, what part of you, or what did you dig down and find to help you stay in such an incredible and intolerable condition?
I had embarked on my own personal healing journey, as it were. I'd begun seeing a counsellor. Part of the situation I was in was that I believed everything was my fault. In going to see this counsellor, she gave me some information about emotional abuse, and that was the first time that I realised that what I was experiencing wasn't my fault. And that was incredibly empowering for me. And so from that point on, I was believing more and more in myself and standing up more and more for myself, which created more fights. But I also was trying to get us to have couples counselling, and for him to get support. He could have accessed some support through his work and so on, which would have been free. But that wasn't done. There's so many signs that it wasn't going to work. But essentially, to answer that question, was that I wanted it to work, very much so. I didn't want the stigma of being a divorcee. I certainly did not want to have a broken family for my girls. No way, not this little black duck. So by hook or by crook, I was going to get us on track. But it takes two.
It certainly does. It certainly does, doesn't it?
And the other thing that happened was, once my daughter had had surgery, my husband was working away. It freed me up a little bit, and I decided, well, that was the time to go and study. It was like, okay, what am I going to do now? Right, that degree that I wanted to do. Yay! So the year I turned 40, I started a counselling degree at Notre Dame.
Wow, and even a few years earlier you probably wouldn't have been able to envision that.
No.
And that was all part of taking your power back.
Absolutely. And so through doing that degree, I learnt a lot. I got to see myself and my relationship and my children in the barest of facts. So it was great knowledge and awareness.
What was it like then seeing, like you say, your relationship and your children stripped down to the details of written in a diagnostic criteria or psychology?
It was pretty overwhelming. I remember being in one unit was about couples counselling, and there was a diagram about domestic violence. I ticked all those boxes, apart from the physical violence at that stage. But I didn't know that domestic violence didn't have to include physical.
What was it like? Was it seeing that you ticked all those boxes and suddenly getting an aha moment that...
It was really overwhelming, and I actually had to leave the room, and I was incredibly upset. It was a revelation. So in one way it was hard and horrible, but in the other it was fantastic. Knowledge is power.
Yeah, it certainly is.
Absolutely. So it just kept empowering me to stand up more for myself, stand up more for my children. And indirectly, it was standing up for him too, by no longer enabling him to do what he was doing.
To make him responsible for his own behaviour.
And me responsible for me too. I'm certainly not squeaky clean. I had things that I was doing that weren't okay, most of which was in reaction to what was being done to me, but I was still doing it.
It's great that by studying for your degree, you actually got great healing from it and great awareness about yourself, which then enabled you to move on.
It did.
So that in itself is powerful. So where are you at now once the marriage is completely over?
So it took some time. Financially, we had a lot going on. It was pretty tricky trying to unhook all of that and settle all of that. That wore me down incredibly, and really it's actually not completely over. 7 years post-separation, it's not completely over, which shows just how difficult negotiating with some people could be. We're nearly there.
That's good news.
We're nearly there. and for me, as you asked, how am I? I'm stronger than ever, and I have more clarity than ever, and I'm recovering from the binge eating disorder and working for myself and helping other women with the same experiences.
And with the finances, so this is the end, the end part of it, was that part of the abuse, withholding finances? Because that can be a part of abuse that people don't realise as well.
Yes,
well as
economic manipulation.
Yes.
Yes, absolutely.
So you've taken all your experiences and got your degree, and now you're moving forward as an empowered woman.
Yes.
So what are you helping women with now? Or men too?
Yeah, men as well. Well, it took over 6 years to do the degree. I had to do it part-time. I had to take time out for myself and also for my daughter. So I started practicing for myself, and I was working with eating disorders. And I'm just so passionate about empowerment and self-esteem for women and children especially, but also for men. What I have found though is that not a lot of men come forward for this sort of work. I offer counselling and I offer recovery groups for eating disorders, binge eating plus anorexia and bulimia and binge purge. Also for domestic abuse.
Apart from being an advocate now for domestic violence and eating disorders, what is Indigo passionate about? What does Indigo want for herself now?
Well, the first word that comes to mind is peace. Peace for myself and for my children and for my ex as well. I would like to feel that I'm contributing to the world in a positive way, and that my experiences can help others to recover or even prevent them from going down certain roads, and just being the best mum, even though my girls are both of them are nearly adults now, just being the best mum and family unit possible.
And often in relationships, it's easy to point the finger at times it's good to look behind the person, and with your degree, are you able to see perhaps why, or get a glimpse of why your husband or ex-husband was or is the way he is? Yes. You're able to actually see.
Yes.
And can you, through that, offer compassion for him now? Are you at that point?
Yes, I can, and I was always compassionate, particularly in the early days, which is often why they get away with things, or any of us get away with things, because the other partner is really compassionate. They know our story. Being able to come out the other side of a horrible experience together and have compassion for the other is really quite an incredible feat for anyone. You can't put the cart before the horse. You do have to validate the feelings that have been experienced, but to not stay stuck in the anger or victim mentality is so important in order to get to the compassion for the other person and compassion for yourself.
Because by getting stuck in that, you're actually disempowering yourself, aren't you?
Absolutely.
You're not being in your own power, are you?
Absolutely. And it's easy to be there, and particularly when if you feel as though all the roads are blocked. It's the being able to get back up again and believe that a solution will present itself, even if it's not there at that time. That's the key, is being able to get back up and find that positive aspect again. It's not so much about falling into that space, but it's about coming back out of it.
And is that something that, I guess it's one of your key qualities then, that you kept getting back up? You kept going because you're here today.
Yeah,
you kept going.
Different times it would take a different period of time to dust myself off. There were some really hurtful, horrible things that were going on. I have the image of a steamroller, in those cartoons.
Yes.
And it's not the same, where they would get steamrolled and pop back up again.
Yes.
For live people, it can take a long time. But if we hold on to belief that it will get better, then we can allow ourselves to honour the experience that we're going through and the place that's put ourselves into. For example, I couldn't meet all the needs of my children at certain times. I just couldn't possibly do it. I couldn't meet my own needs, let alone anyone else's. And they might have been some really basic things. So I had to forgive myself for that. And I had to give myself the empathy and the compassion that I was dealing with something really awful, and this was how it was affecting me. And so I would do my best with what I had in that moment, and so I would look for solutions to help support me through that, whether it might mean buying dinner that night or whatever it took to help support myself through that situation so that I could be the best in that moment for me and my kids. I think that's kind of that key, is acknowledging that it's happened and it's awful and you feel terrible, and that's okay. But what are we going to do about it?
So identifying a coping strategy rather than spending an hour making dinner.
Yeah.
Get takeaway, and then I'll have an hour for my children, or more time for myself to rest, or whatever it is that you're needing right then. So it's taking care of you, bringing it back to you.
Absolutely, and whatever it is that's needed at that time to get through, that's as positive as possible, and being proud of yourself, patting yourself on the back, because no one else is going to in that moment. I've done enough. I've done good enough in this moment. It's not the best, it's not perfect, and let's just lose that word from the dictionary anyway.
I agree.
And perhaps the kids are going to be upset or disappointed, but the whole situation is what it is, and let's just do the best we can in this moment. And sometimes the best we can do in that moment is actually phoning a helpline, phoning the neighbour, can you come and bath my children, or whatever it is that you need help with in that moment.
So just reach out, just pick up the phone, reach out and let someone know. Let someone know what's going on.
I had an incredible friend during some of the worst times, that she would come and visit me every day and sit with me. And this was when I was so depressed, I was sleeping on the couch and I couldn't move. I'd get them to school and I'd come home and that would be it. She would sit with me for a long time every day. She was my lifeline.
And were there words needed, or was it just having someone there, knowing someone was there for you?
Yeah, both. She was very understanding and very compassionate and very generous with her time and her energy. I wasn't alone. And I think had she not been there may have been a different outcome.
It only takes one person.
Absolutely. And so many people aren't as fortunate as I. You know, I had this friend who had the time and the will to come and be with me off her own back. And not everyone has that. So thank goodness there are services available. You just have to pick up the phone. And I know that can seem silly or what good's that going to do? That one person talking to you, just going, yeah, that's really crap. That's horrible what you've been through, and I understand why you feel the way you feel. That can be enough.
That's the lifeline. It's connection, isn't it? It's connecting. Someone hears me.
Absolutely.
Someone hears.
Validation, yeah. And that can make the difference between being able to action the next positive step or action the next negative step.
Which way are you going to go?
Yeah.
And what two inspiring things do you think you've shown your daughters that they will... I mean, there must be so much they've seen you come through so much and what you have modelled to them and shown them.
They've seen me hit the bottom and come back up again. They've seen me reclaim my mind, body and soul. It sounds cliche, but it really is true. They didn't know whether things were going to get better or not. I knew they would, but they only knew what was in front of them, and I've shown them that it does get better, and the tenacity and the resilience to keep trying and to keep helping yourself. And my family has shown them love and dedication and support.
Thank you so much for being so honest.
Oh, you're welcome.
It's an amazing journey, and I'm very proud of you.
Thank you.
And thank you for sharing today with viewers and a lot of people out there that really need to hear this and to know they're not alone. Thank you.
Thank you for providing the opportunity to share it. It's very empowering.
From this, you feel that you'll have healing too?
Absolutely. I don't think that ever stops.
It's a continuous journey, isn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah. So thank you for everything that you provide with this organisation.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for being a part of it. Thank you. And thank you for watching. I think you can clearly see here how important it is to connect, even if it is just one person. Please reach out. You can go to our website for more information, www.1000women1000ways, and we're now also available on podcasts, so you can hear us on your iPods now or in the car. And I want to thank you for watching, and we are all about inspiring powerful connection and touching hearts, as Indigo has helped us to do today. Thank you.